time it really strictly, and then we'll have 2 or 3 minutes for questions. So please, speakers, try not to overrun too much. Okay, off we go.
Hi, so I'm going to talk about categorical judgments in visual overflow. Now, does visual overflow exist? I think the opinion is, even in this room, is quite divided, right? Yes or no? Well, there's this ongoing controversy over visual overflow, right? NetBlog says, yes, of course there's visual overflow, and it's very important to phenomenal consciousness, whereas Hackman Rowe, among others, is a non-believer. Visual overflow is a kind of illusion, and it's not useful to use that concept in our study. Now, both these gentlemen are very clever, right? So, why? Well, this is a very genuine question. Why, given the central importance of phenomenal consciousness in human experience, why do opinions on this fundamental property vary, even among the learned circles, meaning us? So, conventional view of theorizing, we arrive at the theory of consciousness, e.g. overflow, through empirical evidence and also logical thinking. So, if you take this view, there will be convergence. That is something we assume, right? Because if we agree on empirical evidence and if we agree on the way we think logically, theoretical consciousness should be convergent. Then why is it so heterogeneous? I think there's another possibility. In addition to these tools that scientists use, actually there is this metacognition that we have about our own phenomenal experience. And actually, this metacognition is quite heterogeneous, so that people have different ideas about their own phenomenal experience, so that, even if you try your best, you arrive at a very different view about phenomenal consciousness. So the question is the metacognition of the phenomenal properties of consciousness actually different among subjects? And also, do the properties of cognitive processes, based upon it, correlate with the subject's general metacognition of their own phenomenal experience? So we conducted a web study involving 980 subjects about visual overflow. We asked the subjects if their vision was more like A or B. A meaning you're focused on the central visual field and you don't see the peripheral very well. Or B, you see everything clearly. So we're asking the subjects about their folk psychology, so to speak, right? Now, the result is quite divided. About half people think that their vision is like A, very focused, and about half the subjects think that their vision is like B, very well distributed, and there's overflow. Of course, these are laymen, right? So they don't really understand the technical details about our argument about visual overflow. But even so, it's interesting that they have very different intuition about their vision. Now, the next question is consciousness like the refrigerator illusion? You feel as if you're seeing all this. If you're in a room, you feel that as if you're seeing all this, but it is just an illusion that, if you open the refrigerator door, the light is on. If you close it, the light is off, but you believe that the light is usually always on. If you ask this question about refrigerator illusion, the answer is again divided. About half of the population believe that refrigerator illusion is very relevant to the vision, whereas the other half believe that no, there's no refrigerator illusion. So we conclude that the metacognition of the natural nature of visual overflow is actually significantly heterogeneous among subjects. Now, we actually conducted an earlier study on the metacognition of qualia using similar methods. In the field of qualia, these two very clever people are divided on their ideas about qualia, right? Daniel Dennett disqualifies qualia, whereas David Chalmers thinks that qualia are central to the heart problem. If we ask how aware they are about their qualia and their sensory experience, the opinion is quite divided as well. If you ask in 7-point scales, 40% of subjects actually answered they had an awareness of qualia, answering in scales 5, 6, 7, while 22% do not have an awareness of qualia at all. Interestingly, average awareness of Korea increase with age. This is quite significant. Look at the p-value. So this data is actually consistent with this interpretation. Is there a bottom-like tradition of enlightenment? You start as a Korea disqualifier, right? You don't feel that there's such a thing as Korea in your sensory experience. But once, at some moment in your life, you certainly realize that, oh no, I do have Korea. So you become from Korea disqualifier to Korea free. Well, and there's no going back. Well, this is one possibility. So if this is true, then it simply has not gone through this transformation yet. Interestingly, average awareness of visual overflow do not change. It doesn't change. There's no. So compared to Korea, the visual overflow ideas about visual overflow is quite stable. Now, a few jokes, right? Because in the States, I learned that you cannot do without some jokes, right? Which of these two guys do you think are more susceptible to the ineffability of Korea? Bill Gates? Steve Jobs? Yeah. That is the usual concept, idea, right? But contrary to popular belief, there are no significant differences in the awareness of Korea between Mac OS and Windows OS users. So, anyway, good news for Windows users. Now, experiment 2, we conducted a road study on Tokyo backstreets to assess cognitive processes related to visual overflow. In this road study, the subjects were asked to walk through typical Tokyo backstreets like this, right? And immediately after walk through a block, the subjects were asked gist questions about the street they have just walked through. The subject did not expect the questions to come. So this experiment could be, conducted only one trial per subject because this was experiment by surprise. The gist question that the subjects were asked were like this in 10-point scales. Was the street tranquil? Was the street fit for kids to play in? Would you like to take a walk along the street? Were there lots of greens, trees, and vegetables on the street? Would you like to live on the street? How expensive would the rent be on the street? And was the street busy with traffic? Now, it's possible. So the subjects walk through these streets, right? But they were completely unaware that they are going to be asked these questions. So immediately after you turn the corner, you ask these questions, right? So the subjects were called unawares. It appears that the gist impressions were fairly consistent among the subjects, indicating that the subjects were not answering in a random manner. There was some social agreement, right? About these impressions. Now, since the gist impression here asked about by the subject, to the subject was subjective by nature, right? So there were no correct or wrong answers. Therefore, we used confidence level as a measure of performance. Again, if you look at reaction time, there was a weak correlation. The p-value is something on the threshold, so we cannot say for sure. But there was a weak correlation between reaction time and reported confidence. So this again is some indication that the subjects were not answering in a random manner. They did have these gist impressions about the streets. However, when they were asked about facts like, were there any cars parked on the street or were there any bicycles parked on the street, the performance was very poor. So actually, of course, this is what you expect from the results in the literature, right? The subjects were not attending to the factual details on the street, or nor they were remembering all these things. So so these factual questions the subject couldn't answer very well. This is reflected in the confidence level for the gist impression questions and the factual questions. The confidence level reported by the subjects for the gist questions was significantly higher than those reported for the bicycle questions. Were there any bicycles on the street? However, despite this very poor performance of parked cars, the subjects were not significantly less confident about cars. So the subjects believed that they could remember whether they were parked cars or not, but in fact, the subject couldn't remember correctly. Now, and this is also very tentative still. The p-value is 7.0 on the short side, so we need to take more data. It appears that there is a positive correlation between confidence in the gist impression task and, you remember, the subject's metacognition about their own phenomenal experience, right? So that those subjects who answered their experience was like B with visual overflow was more confident about this gist impression task compared to the subjects who answered A in this task. So this is very interesting because these experiments were conducted in completely different manner. One was on web, and the other was on the Tokyo streets. All of a sudden, the subjects were asked these questions, and there was this correlation. We need to take more data in order to say that this is statistically significant. So, conclusion two. The subjects were able to give gist impressions of the street they have walked through more reliably than factual details. The confidence level might be related to the subject's metacognition of the nature of his or her own phenomenal experience, visual overflow. Now, discussions. First, the relation between gist impression and factual details. So if you are asked, just after you have walked through this Tokyo street, was the street fit for kids to play in? Of course, you have to integrate all these factual details, right? Trees, and if there were grown-ups walking, if there was some, maybe if you are in trouble, you could ask for help. Or what kind of buildings there were around the street, right? In this case, there was this old wooden house, which is kind of friendly for children. And if there was a bicycle parked on the street. All these factual details contribute to the gist impression, which was more robust. However, the subject didn't consciously recall these factual details. So it appears that, no, I don't take any stance about visual overflow here. But anyway, if it exists, or if it doesn't exist, it appears that this flow of consciousness does not result in factual details, memories about factual details. Rather, it contributes to what I call a gist impression about the environment that you have just been through. And it makes sense because, such gist impressions like can kids play, or would you like to live on the street, etc., is more relevant for adaptation than factual details. Unless you are looking for bicycles, for example. Maybe your bicycle has been stolen and you're looking for a bicycle. Unless you are in this kind of situation, then it doesn't make sense to pay attention to or remember the factual details. But having a gist impression about the environment does make sense because it contributes to your how you can adapt to the environment. And discussion two, we believe that there is significant heterogeneity in the metacognition of phenomenal experience. So, in this sense, sometimes people argue that consciousness is a social construct. But I wonder if the metacognition of the consciousness, rather than the phenomenal consciousness itself, is a social construct, and if it is variable among subjects. So this is the final slide. So, we have all these different opinions about the nature of consciousness, right? But I think it's worthwhile for us to reflect on our own idea about phenomenology of consciousness. People assume too much that our metacognition is homogeneous. So when we don't agree, we tend to think that this is related to different analysis of empirical data or failure to think logically or whatever. But I suspect that these different opinions might be actually influenced very much by the very different ways actually we have own theory of mind, so to speak, if you like, about our own phenomenal consciousness. And that's my talk. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we've got time for a few questions. So, yeah.
Hi. Yeah, very nice talk. I was wondering, so you showed that metacognition differs per person.
Yeah.
Have you also tested these people on, let's say, visual tasks?
I haven't. I should do that. I'm trying to do that actually in the near future.
I mean, I share your intuition that probably the phenomenology is the same for everybody, but it would be nice to get some
Yeah, it'll be nice if that, yeah, some differences appear. Yeah, I would definitely do that. Yeah, thanks.
So I just thought it was really quite striking that you had a pretty much 50-50 split between the overflow versus non-overflow.
Yeah.
Is efficient.
Yeah.
And I take it that without any reflection or introspection, something like the default view is the overflow view, right? And the fact that you asked people to introspect and half of them ended up saying their experience is more like the slide on the left, you might take as evidence for the generic or anti-overflow view.
Right.
Okay? Because I mean, no one pre-reflectively would say without any introspection that vision has a real difference in grain. It's only through attending that you notice. So I mean, you might take that as rather than being evidence of the split, as evidence against the overflow view.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, do you think? I mean, would you be inclined to agree with that interpretation, or?
I think that's certainly a possible interpretation. And yeah, that interpretation is actually consistent with the data, so that's certainly a possibility. Yeah.
So first, I think this is a very useful reminder of the maxim that you should never underestimate individual difference, especially among highly educated people. Academics are weird, so it's very interesting stuff. But I wonder specifically on this issue of sort of difference in metacognition. So it's very interesting there are differences, and you suggest they might change over time. But I wonder also about the role of education in all this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that certain views, as you get more educated in the subject, become more appealing, I think. So sort of thinking about the overflow versus non-overflow, the idea that we only have sort of foveal acuity might be correlated with education, but doesn't that toss a further wrinkle into this metacognition issue? Right? Our metacognition might get sort of dominated by our education.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's certainly a valuable point to make. Yeah, sure. So one of those last one. Yeah.
Can we replicate your study of the overflow here and now?
Oh, great. So how many people think like 8? Feel like 8?
Was that the full colour? The full colour.
Like no overflow. No overflow.
No overflow.
8. No overflow.
Now I'm confused.
Like B with overflow? Like 50, yeah, 50-50.
I'm going to vote for 1.5.
Oh,
So but then it's not a function of education, I guess.
oh, okay.
It's also 50-50 here, right? I mean, we're all educated.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So I have a suggestion, which is that you could go to the West Village and corner Ned Block just after he walks around the corner. Ask him what he's just seen on that screen. And I bet he hasn't seen very much.
Okay,
Anyway,
thank you.
very good. Thank you. Okay, so our next talk is going to be Guy Pitter on predictions.